How's the body organized? The learning target for this lesson is that you can use argument supported by evidence for how the body is a system of interacting subsystems composed of groups of cells. And this is important because there's a whole bunch of vocabulary that describes how cells are grouped together. So let's begin. So starting on the smallest unit, we are going to talk about specialized cells. Now, the concept of cells should be really familiar to you because we've already studied what cells are and what's inside a cell. But this is kind of a new idea that the cell can be specialized. So let's talk about what that means. Basically, it just means that they can have different sizes and shapes based on their job. So that word differentiated describes that. Different, you know what that means. The cells look slightly different from each other on the outside. They can have different shapes and sizes. Some of them can be very small, like a red blood cell. Those are super tiny and really flexible to move through the body. And some can be very large compared to a muscle cell, which is very long and skinny. Plants also have this. This is nothing new to write. It's the same things you just wrote. But just for comparison, some plants have these long extensions. Root hair cells have these long extensions that help them absorb water. These conducting cells inside stems and roots are long and skinny for passing along water and other supplies around the plant. And then pollen grains can be very spherical, like a globe shape with all these little spiky things. So the big idea is that their shape helps them perform their job. So their structure matches their function. One thing we see here are stem cells, which are also called undifferentiated cells. Stem cells are cells with none of the genes turned on yet to make them into one particular kind of cell. So stem cells can become each different kind of cell by turning on a certain set of genes.
Dear Tim and Moby, how are cells different? From Stephen. Well, for starters, there are two basic types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells don't have any membrane around their nuclear material. They're single-celled organisms that can live on their own. Well, thanks a lot. Eukaryotic cells are what we're made of. They have a nucleus of hereditary material that's surrounded by a membrane and controls the life of the cell. Plant and animal cells are both eukaryotic. Cells come in all different shapes and sizes. The size and shape of a cell can sometimes tell you something about its job. One nerve cell in your leg can be a meter long. Those little fingers on each end, called dendrites, let signals jump from one nerve synapse to the next. This here red blood cell is about 1/10 the size of a period on your computer screen. It's a tiny flexible disc that can move through even the narrowest blood vessels. A plant xylem cell is long and hollow with holes so it can transport water and minerals through the plant. Plant and animal cells are pretty similar inside, but there are two major differences. Plant cells can make their own food, and animal cells can't. Plant cells' green color comes from green organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts trap light energy and enable plants to conduct photosynthesis. Animal cells are surrounded with a flexible cell membrane. Plant cells have a membrane too, but outside of that, they protect themselves with a stiff outer wall. Both plant cells and animal cells work in teams. When you take a tiny piece of a plant, there are tons of cells clustered together in that piece working together. Same goes for a piece of an animal. I'm not saying that. Oh, fine. Cells team up and work together, just like Moby and me.
Also, just to remember that when we're talking about atoms and molecules, those are all still much smaller than a cell. They have to be able to go inside cells. So far we've just gotten to this level here, talking about cells being different sizes and shapes based on their job. Now, if we were to make the scale a little bit bigger, and we look at a collection of cells that are all doing the same job and have the same appearance, same size and shape, they're all working together to do the same job, we call that a tissue. Okay, so tissues are cells that are on a team, very similar to like this basketball team. If we look at the basketball team, everyone's wearing the same uniform, right? They're all similar age, other than the coaches, and they're all working toward one goal, which for a basketball team is to win the game. So if we start looking at different tissues in the body, the cells that compose these tissues all look alike to each other, and they're all working together to do the same job. So we're going to talk about the different kinds of tissues in animal and plants, but you can see some of them here. Muscle, nervous tissue. More on that in just a minute. Just for reference on your worksheet, we are going to basically work our way down this column first, okay? And then we're going to compare to plants second. So this way first, and then back up here. Okay, so our first kind of animal tissue that we're going to talk about is epithelial. So epi means on the outer surface or upon. So this kind of tissue covers the outside of the body, and it lines the inner surfaces of the body. And it's also partly what makes your glands, okay? So it's definitely found in your skin. If we look at the picture of our chimpanzee here, we can see all the different places and the names for that different kind of epithelial tissue. So you often find epithelial tissue lining your internal passageways, like in your respiratory system and in your digestive system, as well as on the outside of you on your skin. The second type of animal tissue is called connective. So you guys know what connect means. It basically connects one kind of tissue to another. So it fills in spaces, connects other tissues together, supports, protects, nourishes, and insulates organs. So fat cells belong to the connective tissue group. You can see some of the other examples up here. Cartilage. Blood technically is a connective tissue. Fat we talked about. There's loose connective tissue, and bone is considered connective tissue. So it's found in ligaments, cartilage, blood, some of the examples we just listed. The third type of animal tissue is muscular tissue. So we find muscular tissue all over our bodies. The main job of muscular tissue is for movement. Those muscle cells contract and relax to allow movement, and they do make up some of your organs. Technically, there's three categories. We have skeletal muscles, which are attached to your skeleton, smooth muscle, which is attached to or makes up organs, internal organs like your stomach, and then cardiac muscle. In cardiac muscle, the only place you find that is in your heart. So you can list any of those places. It's found in your heart, bicep, triceps, or stomach. These are skeletal muscles, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Here's another comparison of the different kinds of muscle tissue. So again, smooth muscle we find in your internal organs like your stomach. Skeletal muscle is attached to your bones, skeleton. So like this is your upper arm, your humerus. And then your cardiac muscle is only found in your heart. And this weird. The last kind of animal tissue is nervous tissue. So nervous tissue is found in your nervous system, all the parts that make up your nervous system. So its main job is to transmit messages through the body. So it's found in your brain, your spinal cord, your nerves. It's also found a lot in your sense organs. Eyes, ears, skin, tongue. So depending on where you look, you will find all of these tissue types throughout the body. So here we're looking at just someone's arm, and we see all the tissue types just in someone's arm. We have epithelial tissue as part of their skin. We have muscle tissue that makes up the muscles in their arm. nervous tissue throughout all the parts that's transmitting messages between what's going on in the hand and back to the brain. We have blood, which is a connective tissue, cartilage, bone, these are all connective tissues, and the loose connective tissue that holds all of the other tissues together. Now let's watch a short video clip.
In plants and animals, similar cells are grouped together to form tissues. The human body is made up of many different kinds of tissue. Groups of bone cells, for example, form bone tissue. And muscle cells form muscle tissue. The different types of cells that make up the tissues of the human body have distinctive architectures that are well suited for what they do. Take the cells that form the epidermis, the thin outer part of skin. The epidermis consists of several layers of cells that fit closely together. They provide an effective barrier against bacteria and other things that could cause harm if they got inside the body. The top layer consists of dead cells that are constantly being rubbed off and replaced by cells from below.
The muscles attached to the skeleton have cells that look very unlike skin cells. Muscle cells are very long and fiber-like. Each cell contains many fine threads called myofibrils. Myofibrils, in turn, contain two types of even smaller filaments called actin and myosin. A closer look at the actin and myosin shows how they can slide over each other, making it possible for a muscle cell to contract and expand. Thousands of muscle cells contract and expand together, making it possible to move an arm or leg. Bone cells serve a different function. Bone cells secrete calcium and other materials that harden and form the body's bones.
When we think or try to solve a problem, we're using other kinds of cells. Nerve cells, which are also called neurons. There are billions of neurons in the brain alone, and these can communicate with other nerve cells that branch throughout the body, forming the body's nervous system. The architecture of nerve cells varies according to what function they serve, but all have the same basic design. Each consists of a single cell body which contains the cell's nucleus. Branching out from the cell body are fibers of different lengths called dendrites. There is also a single long fiber called the axon. In some cells, the axon is very long, up to 3 feet. Signals race from the dendrite of one cell through the cell body and along the axon. At the end of the axon, the signal is picked up by the dendrite of another nerve cell. Together, the billions of nerve cells in the body form an intricate communications network that makes possible our thoughts and senses.
Ow!
A drop of blood tells another story about cells. The blood that flows through the veins and arteries of the body's circulatory system contains different kinds of cells that perform jobs vital to our existence. Red blood cells are the most numerous. They look a little like donuts with their centers filled in. Red blood cells carry oxygen from the lungs to other cells throughout the body. There are about 25 trillion red blood cells in the body of an adult. Each has a lifespan of only about 125 days, so new ones are constantly being produced at the rate of about 2 million a second. Blood also contains white blood cells. Although much fewer in number, white blood cells are important defenders of the body against invaders like disease-causing bacteria. Some white blood cells can actually engulf bacteria and other harmful things, making them harmless by
Looking at the other side of your table, let's take a quick comparison to plants. Plants have tissues too, and they only have 3. The first kind is dermal. So dermal tissue is a protective layer. It's a protection and it prevents water loss. So if we look inside a plant, the part that we looked at called the epidermis is dermal tissue. You guys looked at both onions and you looked at the leaf, the lettuce, and we were looking at layer of epidermis. You had basically peeled off this outer layer. In the case of the onion, it was one of those two layers. In the lettuce, we were going for the bottom layer so that we could see the stomata. Plants also have what's called vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is for transportation. It's transporting water and food. So you can find it throughout the plant, all in the roots, in the stems, and in the leaves, because all of those parts need to gather and pass around the materials inside a plant. And there's actually two tissue types that fit into this category. There's xylem and phloem. So those two tissues together are what form the veins and leaves. And you guys had seen veins when we looked at our leaf on the microscope not too long ago. The last kind of tissue in a plant is called ground tissue. And it's kind of everything else that makes up a plant. So it has lots of different possible jobs. It's just not transporting, and it's not for protection or preventing water loss. So the parts that are doing photosynthesis, sometimes you might remember that was called the palisade layer inside a leaf. The part that does food storage, if you think of like a carrot, that's stored food for the plant. That would be ground tissue. The part that's helping the plant grow, or just general support and protection, is ground tissue. So here, if you're looking at a cross section of a plant, we can see that each part of the plant has actually all three kinds of tissue in it. So if we go bigger in scale, we get to the organ level. So organs are structures that are composed of two or more different types of tissues. Generally, organs have recognizable shapes, and people recognize those parts as doing very specific functions or jobs. So if we look at the ones up here on the list, you might recognize these: lungs, the brain, the stomach, the heart. Those are multiple tissue types all working together to do one specific job for the body. So go ahead and list those examples of animal organs. You can list a couple. You don't have to list every single one. Stomach, liver, heart, lungs, and brain. We will talk more about these individually. And plants have organs too. They basically only have 4 organs. They have roots, they have stems, they have leaves, and they have flowers. Each organ in a plant is multiple tissues working together to do one job for the plant. And getting even bigger is what we call an organ system. So based on our previous definitions, you can probably guess what the definition of an organ system is. It's when you have many organs working together to perform one function in the body. So here are all the potential animal organ systems, and we will take time to learn about what each one of those does in a little bit later this week. And in a plant, plants have organ systems too, but they're a little bit simpler. They have a shoot system and a root system. Again, these are multiple organs working together to perform one function. Now for a couple video clips. Before we get to the video clips, one more graphic, which shows a nice comparison between all the different layers or layers of organization that we just talked about. We started here at the cellular level, okay? We know that molecules go in and out of cells, right? And they're smaller than cells. So multiple cells working together to do the same job make up or are what we call tissues, okay? Here we've got muscle tissue. Tissues all working together to do the same job is what's considered an organ. So we're looking at a blood vessel. Blood vessel is an organ. And then if we've got a bunch of organs doing the same job together, then we have an organ system. So blood vessels belong to the cardiovascular system or the circulatory system. And a whole bunch of organ systems working together make an organism, a living thing, in this case, a lady. Okay, now it's time to summarize and process what you just learned with this foldable. So the foldable's already been cut out, at least the outside of it has been. So now you guys are going to use scissors to basically cut between the tabs here on what I'm drawing in as dotted lines. Okay, so you only cut to this line here because this part is where you're going to put the glue. Okay, now under each tab or term, you're going to write a definition for each term. You can put it in your own words or write what you learned from the notes, and an example of something that fits in that category for either plants or animals. So for instance, you could, under tissues, define it as groups of similar cells with the same job. For example, muscle tissue in animals. Okay, that is it. This is part of your notebook score or check on the next check. So make sure you do it.